All right. Hello, Paul. You're looking good. Hello, everybody. This is Dispersing the Fog. This is episode 29 of Dispersing the Fog. I'm Adam Rogers here with Paul Palango. September 28th, 2025. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Episode 29, Paul. That's pretty good.
Yeah, we missed one last week since we were both tied up in places where we couldn't escape.
Well, I regret my. So I was planning to go camping and hiking in Cape Chignecto, and so I got up to Cape Chignecto, and in fact, the hiking trails are open. They're open now in Nova Scotia, but the camping aspect of it wasn't. So I went and did a day hike and came back. Anyway, wouldn't have been able to do the show either way, but should have planned that a little better, I think. But so
It
that
sounded
goes.
like the wedding I went to last weekend.
Oh yeah.
You can look on the map. It's a place called Evans Lake, north of Squamish, BC.
Oh yeah.
It was in the woods. It was so sort of rough and tumble getting in there that the 90-something-year-old grandfather of the groom had to be carried in on a chair by three burly people and placed down. But then the bride came out walking out of the woods like some sort of fairy, almost stumbled three or four times going over the rocks, but it turned into one of the most beautiful weddings I've ever been to. It was like the party was great. Location was kind of rough. We didn't stay in the bunks. We stayed in a motel in Squamish. A little too old for camping and bunking and doing all that other stuff that they were doing.
Who are the other two burly guys?
Not me. Well, this is a whole community of rock climbers and outdoors people. So there's lots of muscle there.
I bet Squamish is a great area. I've been there. Didn't have a chance to stay, just kind of passed through, but stopped for a bit to do a hike there one day a few years ago. Paul, we got lots to get to today. Like I say, episode 29 for sports fans. That's Marc-Andre Fleury, who just retired with the Penguins, and Joe Carter, because we're into baseball playoff season. Old Joe Carter was number 29. So a good episode, I'm sure, and we have lots to discuss today. So we're going to get through. I'll ask Paul, pre-order any books this week, Paul?
Um, no, no, I wouldn't really want to do that.
We're gonna talk about the book announcement. Lisa Banfield as co-author of a book, interesting in itself. But we'll talk about the announcement this week that Lisa Banfield is going to be releasing a book coming out in January. Can be pre-ordered. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the upcoming budget for the federal government, and Mark Carney has made an announcement about border security that I think we'll want to get into. Deputy Commissioner out west, David Teboul, has gotten himself in some trouble, so we'll bring that up. And an update on Jack and Lilly Campbell, missing children in Nova Scotia. That there's been an update on that story we've been covering here. And we'll talk a little bit about the challenge before the Supreme Court on the notwithstanding clause, Section 33 of the Constitution, and is generating some political debate. So we'll get into that a little bit too. But Paul, you're back in your home office from a trip. How are you doing?
It's good. I mean, the trip I spent, was sort of work pleasure. Took me to many places, but I ended up meeting with a bunch of people on the West Coast. In fact, Sharon said it was one of the best parts of the trip. Just sort of sitting in on some of these chats and hearing how Canada really works. And hopefully, a number of the people I've talked to or people associated with them will be coming on the show in the near future. They have a lot to say and would like to be here. And I think we're going to have fun talking to them about the intrigues and how Canada really works.
So this was sort of a vacation, but also sort of a work trip, it would seem, to get uh, certainly that's the way you'll portray it to CRA, I'm sure, but
Well,
no, you were having meetings on topics and you may write about them or talk about them here, so that's great.
Well, it's not, to do what we're doing, we have to know the people. And one of the things that, I think we're good at is going out and meeting people and talking to them. And a lot of people want to talk to us. And I was surprised by the reach that even this show has, even on the West Coast, that people are watching it and they like what we're doing. Uh,
That I had the same experience, Paul. I was down not this past week, but the one before down in White Point, Nova Scotia. Beautiful spot on the coast, and the water was warm enough to swim in still, so that was great. For the Legal Aid of Nova Scotia annual conference, there for 4 days. Lawyers from across the province, managing lawyers, staff lawyers, and executive people, and lots of people there are aware of the show, watching it every week, and interested in what we're doing. Some of them wanting to get on as guests as well, so we'll vet those requests as we go along here. But really interesting to get some downtime with the lawyers from across the province, get to see what other people are going through, experience with certain judges, and all of that sort of thing. So. Yeah, that's that, but that's it though. For us to be out there, we have to be aware of the issues, talking to people, and coming up with these insights.
yeah. And as I said, it was, I mean, I remember, one of the meetings we had, we sat down with this person and the person went to talk and looked at Sharon and said, "Is it okay to talk in front of her?" I said, "Oh, she's been well involved in this for a long time. She's gone from being a glass artist to my assistant sleuth, and asks great questions and has good observations. But she thought it was really, really interesting seeing this array of people from different sort of uh, backgrounds and different stories, not even overlapping stories, but all telling essentially the same story about the breakdown of the integrity of the system in Canada, you know.
Yeah, it's as the more we learn about this, the staff shortages and just the way things are being patched together across the country, doesn't exactly fill one with confidence.
Well, I got invited to this odd thing the day after I got back on Wednesday. I was invited to a men's book club, and I thought, okay, I'll go. But I can't drive. I said I'll be jet lagged. He said we'll pick you up, and you can kind. And it was held at Blue Rocks, the beautiful place, just outside Lunenburg.
Yeah.
And a car came and somebody came and picked me up, and it was actually a prominent member of the Nova Scotia community, well-known prominent member. And there's a bunch of other people there. It was a over 55 bike club. And we spent 3 hours talking about anatomy of a cover-up and 22 murders and how it worked. But one of the questions that came up for me was about integrity of the system involving, the media, the courts, and government, and which one is showing any signs, which one would I trust the most? And it was a hard question to answer because going through what we've seen in the last couple of years, all of them are severely flawed right now. And you'd hope the courts were the ones working, but even then, you're a little nervous about. I've seen too many examples of things going south that shouldn't have gone south. So it is disturbing. And I think in Canada, we think, oh, well, things are steaming along nicely. We had a few hiccups here, but the underlying part of the country is I'm really nervous about. I mean, the media doesn't work effectively. The government seems to be in the hand of business, and the courts seem to be at sea. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting, but
Courts seem to they're very backed up. I know that. Like to get a trial in regular matters now, you're looking at a year in many cases and more. It's taking a long time to get to things. There's interesting, like one of the presentations we had down at White Point was to do with defending sexual assault cases. And one of the things in sexual assault cases now, which is taking up tons of time, is every time, imagine now. that with text messages back and forth. Okay. Most people involved in an encounter or a relationship are going to have dozens, sometimes hundreds of text messages back and forth about whatever they're planning to do. And those are records, and they're always now subject to a separate application to determine whether they can be brought into the trial because there's all these sexual assault myths, which, lawyers and judges have to be careful not to, not to abuse these myths or not to use them in any way. Uh, so there's all these upfront protections to make sure that complainants, they're not subject to all those things improperly. Well, it ends up with multiple court applications before you ever get to the trial, when in fact, many would argue that those can be just done at the trial and using appropriate discretion at the time adds hours and hours and hours to cases up front and lots of work, filing briefs and getting all these things ready. So, you know, if that was changed, that would open up lots of time in the court system and allow other things to be done that would be more productive.
Well,
That's just one example, right?
yeah, well, it's, in our previous, we had our previous guest, Wayne McKay on, the law professor from Dalhousie University. One of the subjects we talked about was law reform in Canada, like how to streamline things and bring the laws up to date. Much like we had the Law Reform Commission, decades ago. It seems like the time is here to seriously update the way the laws are, written and applied in Canada, because of things like that and other things, disclosure issues, the Stinchcombe case, where everything is nothing is safe, no information is safe, and defendants are allowed to just tie the courts up and dig for things they shouldn't be seeing.
Yeah, it could be real clarification on that point. On these records things, it used to be, well, if you had to see your counselor, well, the defendant could apply to see those records. They're probably not going to get them, but they might, and that would be it. Now it's every case because every case basically is going to have text messages, Facebook messages, Snapchat, something, right? That can draw a disclosure application. So it's slowing things down quite a bit that way. Anyway, lots of things that can be done. There was, yeah, interesting moments down in White Point. There was like I said, the water was warm. The golf course was next door, so you lots of time for sort of just talking to each other. But good presentations too on legal topics, top 10 Supreme Court cases on criminal law and all that. So educational and lots of fun. And our team came second in the trivia night, so not too bad there either. But
Second, I thought you would at least be first.
well, we were lucky to get that. We had a couple of lawyers from Cape Breton. There was one category there had like 20 dog emojis on, and you had to name the dog breeds. And I was like, I don't know. But most of them, they were mostly more difficult questions than that. But Paul, let's get to a few stories here. Where do you want to start? We want to start maybe with the Jack and Lilly Campbell update. This was a story, of course, that's been ongoing in Nova Scotia the last number of months. We had it's a kind of a weird situation in that we hear that there's hundreds of videos being sent to the police and hundreds of statements and updates being given. On the other hand, we hear very little from the police about anything that's resulted from any of these videos. What's your sense of what's going on there, Paul?
Well, there was an article the other day, one of the CT on CTV, one of their police experts, an ex-policeman coming on saying, he wrote a piece saying, "Oh, trust the RCMP. They're getting to the bottom of it. The fact that they're not saying anything doesn't mean anything and shouldn't be taken the wrong way because they're diligently working behind the scenes. I can assure you that they will get things done." Then those of us who have dealt with the RCMP have seen this before, where there's something going on behind the scenes. Usually they're fumbling around. It's not assured they're going to get to the end. And it makes you ask questions about who's in charge, who was it, what was their background. I mean, one of the things that came up, well, on my trip out west, quite surprising. I was meeting with various people, and the name of Staff Sergeant Rob McCammon came up. And he's the guy in charge of major crimes and behavioral sciences in Nova Scotia. I think, or the acting guy in charge, as is often the case with the RCMP. They don't appoint anyone; they just have him acting for 6 years. McCammon's previous experience, as far as I could tell, is that he was involved in national security federal policing. He was involved apparently in the Cameron Ortis case.
Oh,
Cameron Ortis was, if you didn't know, was like the number four guy in the RCMP who was arrested in 2019 on selling information to criminals about phones and access to the encrypted technology. He was eventually last year sentenced to 14 years in prison and is currently residing in William Head, sort of the plush resort prison outside Victoria. What then McCammon goes from there to being in charge of some on the ground policing. Is this guy the right guy for the job? It's a reasonable question to ask in the RCMP because people are moved from one job to another with no experience or background only because of their rank and seniority. And so you don't have this sort of meritocracy. You just have people who've been there getting jobs. And so, like, looking at the way this case has been handled, I think it's reasonable to ask if the people who are in charge were actually qualified to be there. I mean, it's reasonable.
they given what I remember of the Cameron Ortis case, and I remember at the time thinking this guy should not be convicted. This doesn't look right. I'm glad to hear he's in a good prison if that's the case. The So it's not even clear that that situation was handled properly or that that is where this guy's expertise would lie, if anywhere. But yeah, this Jack and Lily Campbell disappearance has drawn a lot of questions. The latest information is that the RCMP have brought in these dogs. I don't know if they're called cadaver dogs, but they're designed, I think they're trained to look for dead bodies, dead human remains, not living bodies. I guess that's a distinction in the dog world. So that's what the RCMP has done, announced this last week. Have not heard any follow-up from that. That was just the latest in the investigation.
Well, I think the interesting thing about that story too is that, I think they had to bring the cadaver dog in from outside.
British Columbia, I think was
Yeah, because
yeah.
there's nothing here. Like in light of what happened in the Nova Scotia massacres in 2020 and all the so-called reforms, I mean, the RCMP was under-equipped, understaffed. Many of their specialty units either they didn't have a helicopter. Their dogs are tied up. They've got, 20-30% of their members off on long-term disability. Nothing has been really fixed. You haven't seen any sort of improvements here. And it's outrageous that they would have to bring the dog in from across the country because everyone's off sick here basically.
Imagine having to fly in a dog. I would have thought every few detachments, every region is at least going to have a dog team to be called in an emergency situation, looking for a missing person or a dangerous criminal on the loose. That should be within, minutes or hours at the most.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why the RCMP model of policing in the contract provinces outside of Ontario and Quebec doesn't really work, and especially in Nova Scotia where everything is spread out. There's no if you had large regional forces, the large regional forces would each have their own dog teams, their own, and they'd be able to help each other as well. That doesn't happen here. And they might say it's happening. Oh, we haven't integrated this or that, but it's really the RCMP controlling it and using their standards to dictate what happens. And it doesn't work. The Jack Lilly Sullivan case is a good example of how lethargic the RCMP is in in conducting serious investigations.
Well, we'll see what comes of this, if anything. I know like the media has been on this a little bit to at least ask the questions of the RCMP, like, is there any update? Is there anything new? And that's where this information arose, but um, hasn't been anything in the last, you'd think with something like this, you'd still get daily updates as they're being active. If there's daily activity, you'd think there'd be daily updates. I mean, what we talked about earlier of the RCMP just saying, oh, there's lots happening behind the scenes, trust us. Well, this is part of the reason why we don't, because you just won't tell us what's going on unless you're pressed on it.
Well, and it raises questions about the very first response of the RCMP. Historically, I know that most cases are screwed up because the first Mountie on the scene doesn't do what should be done. They're always looking for a way not to conduct an investigation or looking for the easy way out. And that's what looks like happened here. Maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like the first officers on the scene didn't take it as seriously as they should have taken it. And a lot of the important fundamental work that should have been done in those first few hours wasn't done properly.
Yeah.
That's my sense of it.
Yeah. Assuming that they're just in the woods nearby and they could have been long gone in a vehicle.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so we'll keep a track on that. Police investigations. Paul, first of all, small world, eh? You're out west and you're here making connections through RCMP, or maybe this the RCMP is a small world, crossing the country and being put in different roles in BC, Nova Scotia. I guess there's only so many RCMP jurisdictions left, but still seems like a
Well,
pretty
there's a lot. There's still a lot.
yeah.
And,
So
and amazingly, some people still love them. It's unbelievable.
well, they might love them a little less out in BC. They had a recent deputy commissioner being arrested, David Teboul, arrested for assault while choking. You aware of that story, Paul?
Yeah, it sort of was brought to my attention. I mean, you're in BC, and then the assistant commissioner gets arrested for 3 counts of assault, in Abbotsford, BC, which is east of Vancouver. Um, it's incredible. I mean, we don't know what happened. There's sort of a ban. We know it happened in a public place.
hmm,
It looks like it may be family related or something like that. But the RCMP prides itself on talking about violence and being these paragons of virtue. But the force has an incredible history of being violent, harassing, etc. When I was out west, one of the people I met with was Janet Merlo on Vancouver Island, and she was involved in the original harassment cases against the RCMP that ended up with $100 million settlement shared between like 3,000 victims. And we talked about her and Catherine Galliford, who recently passed away, as being at the forefront of this. And one of the amazing things, before we get back to Teboul, is that this $100 million settlement happened, and not one person, one Mountie was held accountable. Not one by the federal government. They gave 100, and there's another case going on now for over $1 billion that's working its way through the courts. Similar case.
yeah.
And the governments of Canada and the provinces that hire the RCMP are standing behind the RCMP and don't recognize that this is a, a an organization with a broken culture.
Can you
It
imagine
has
any other context where you're spending $100 million that you don't want to spend, don't want to pay, but you're agreeing to because you know you have to, and you're not holding anybody accountable. Nobody gets
not,
fired, nobody gets demoted, nobody gets moved out to another profession, you know?
no, they keep pouring more money into the organization. Like, oh no, no, they're not pouring money. Carney recently announced there's like a $95 million cut in the budget for the RCMP, and the RCMP is going, oh, we can't do that. We need that money. They've got $6 billion. 95, it's a matter of management.
Huh.
$95 million is a drop in the bucket in their resources, but they're so used to just taking taxpayer money and frittering it away that they can't see reality. And the problem is the public doesn't see the reality either and are seem unwilling to hold this force accountable.
Well, it's an interesting thought experiment now, Paul, to compare all that. Like you could have been describing Canada Post right there. It was in the middle of a strike and a crisis and a financial, they're basically bankrupt if you believe the minister. And in the case of Canada Post, they have competition and other people are showing actually this could be done much better. The RCMP has competition, but not in the same jurisdictions where they're offering services usually. So anyway, it's a management issue and
Yeah, it's a
a
management.
management issue and a union issue.
And so they've got the wrong people, and this has been going on for 30 years. We talked about how this sort of the good people were gradually eliminated, and the people who were put in charge got there for a reason, usually political reasons rather than meritocracy reasons. And you end up with a guy as Assistant Commissioner David Teboul, who does whatever he did. No, he's innocent until found guilty, but something happened. And it's indicative, when we talked to Janet Merlo, Sharon and I talked to Janet Merlo, this, and we hope to have her on the show in the near
Yeah.
future. She said she'd like to come on the show. She has a lot to say that's very important. And maybe next week we will be able to get her. But
Be great.
this is the issue. You got an assistant commissioner who loses it or appears to lose it and does something, that chokes someone or is accused of choking someone, they should never be in that position, whether they're guilty or not guilty, whether it was a family thing or other, that they lose that control and lose sense of who they are and what they should be doing. It's mind-boggling, but the force is filled with those kinds of people. I mean, I hear it all the time from every corner of the country about RCMP members at every rank who shouldn't be police officers.
This Teboul situation, it sounded like it was, yeah, the reading between the lines a little bit with the article, sounded like it happened at a recreation complex in Abbotsford. And so a couple of things. One, might presume or might think that it would be caught on camera somewhere. I'm sure there's lots of cameras around these recreation centers. There are everywhere else, so why not in Abbotsford? And secondly, you wonder, well, was it anything to do with a sporting event, a competition, a game or something? If that's the case, somebody got out of hand with another parent, with a player, with whatever. Boy, that would reflect very badly on the RCMP. If you can't keep your cool at a game, how are you going to keep your cool out on the street? That's concerning.
It is, and watch how let's follow this and see what happens to Tabul because one of the things we've all noticed over the years is when an RCMP member goes to a court, more often than not, magic happens and somehow the case never gets resolved properly. It just disappears.
There's there the RCMP and others, yeah, you talk about investments and I guess what's intended to happen with the RCMP budget cuts across the board in the federal government, but not everywhere, including border security and federal policing. Uh, Prime Minister Carney announced that they're going to put some more money into border security. I think, yeah, trying to bolster federal policing. Maybe somebody in the PMO has been listening to us, Paul.
I actually got an email the other day saying exactly that.
Oh yeah,
Mark, he is
excellent.
listening to you. He must be watching your show because you guys talk about the ports police and how they were canceled in 1997 by Jean Chrétien to save a little bit of money
Yeah,
when and it just opened up the ports to control by the Hells Angels and other criminal organizations. And at the time, I remember being involved in it back in 1997, 98 and Phil Murray was the commissioner of the RCMP, and he had this great idea of decentralizing the RCMP, so taking basically all its commanders and spreading them out across the country, which turned out to be a bad idea. And getting rid of duplication and overlap, redundancy. Why do we have Ports Canada Police when we have the RCMP? And everyone knows the RCMP are the premier force in Canada. Why don't we save the government money by getting rid of Ports Canada Police and the RCMP and municipal police will take over? Well, yeah, they got rid of Ports Canada Police and no one took over. They didn't understand how to police the
Yeah.
ports, didn't know who the players were, and just opened up Canada to all the stuff that's going on now, importation of drugs and whatever coming through the ports because there is no policing. And the fact that the government is now thinking about, um, bringing back something like Ports Canada Police is encouraging. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but the RCMP will resist to the end, say, but we're doing that job. You can't take that job away from us. Look how, oh, yeah, well, we haven't got anyone there right now. They're all off on long-term sick leave because somebody said boo to them in the dark. It's unbelievable. Like nobody wants to hold this force accountable, and the country is paying for it.
Well, one of the big things that's happening sort of geopolitically here is with the United States and the tariffs, and the president early on and since has linked the the Canadian tariffs to our border issues. And so it certainly seems incumbent upon the Canadian government to do something, or at least appear to be doing something about the borders. And so maybe in an inadvertent, backhanded, or accidental way, we'll do the right thing because for a political purpose, feeling the pressure from the United States, all of a sudden we'll take care of our borders and our ports better, just to satisfy them, but actually also to do the right thing. So
And I mean,
hopefully
that's
it works
that's
out.
the important thing, Adam. That we've given Donald Trump, crazy man in the United States, actually some credibility because he's right about what's going on in Canada, and we've allowed him. We should never have put him in that position. Will we do anything? Well, it's hard to know. I mean, you'd expect the right thing to be done by the government of Canada in the interests of Canada. But that doesn't always happen because there's always that other thing about money and business in Canada that, if somebody's making money on something, we don't really want to get in front of them. If somebody can make a buck, let's not stop them, even if it's illegal, because that's what we're about. That's what we seem to be about, rather than sort of the integrity of the country.
Yeah, well, we always have to watch ourselves, right? Just because the president says something doesn't mean it's always wrong. Sometimes,
Yeah, that's right.
you know,
And
usually
on
takes
the
it too
money,
far, even when it is, but
And on the money issue, like being out in the Vancouver area, just seeing the money out there that just smells illegal. Like how many Mercedes Maybachs do you have to see and rare cars that are 300, 200, 300,000 each to buy. I saw cars out there like I've never seen. Well, since I've been in Beverly Hills, I saw a few of these things back then, Bugattis and things like that. There's just enormous amounts of money out there, and it doesn't smell like good money.
yeah. Yeah, no, not good for anybody there. Paul, we've got a good chunk of the show left, and we wanted to leave some time to talk about Lisa Banfield's book announcement. But before we get to that, I want to give people a little bit because they might have been hearing about this case before the Supreme Court, and there's lots of consternation back and forth between the Quebec governments, the Alberta government, the federal government, people calling on. There was a big debate in Parliament last week led by the Bloc Québécois telling the federal government to pull their factum, which is their written brief argument in the Supreme Court on this question. So I'll be very quick about it, but I think people will be appreciate an understanding. So Bill C-21, which was their legislation saying you cannot wear religious symbols what if you're a public servant. That went past the legislature with the Quebec government using the notwithstanding clause. So basically say, okay, we know or recognize that this may be against fundamental rights and freedoms in our country, but we're going to invoke Section 33 to say we're going to bring this legislation in, notwithstanding its potential violation of the charter. So that's fine. That happens. They've done that with language laws. Other provinces have done it with other issues. The controversy seemed to have arisen with the federal government's brief, which didn't really go. So arguments have been made in the Supreme Court. Usually, if the notwithstanding clause is invoked, that's it, and nobody even talks about it anymore. Recently, in Saskatchewan, with uh, the UC Pride case, the court out there said, "Well, even if you invoke the notwithstanding clause, we can still talk about whether it was a violation and what all, we can get more into the complexities of it." So, okay, fine. In this case, the federal government has said, all right, the notwithstanding clause has to be invoked every 5 years on a piece of legislation. If you invoke it now, it has a sunset clause. It's good. You can't just say this is going to be the law forever. It has to be reviewed every 5 years. What the federal government is saying is if you routinely do it every 5 years, you're effectively saying that's not the law anymore. We don't have these fundamental freedoms, and so the court should say you can't just invoke it every 5 years. Well, Alberta doesn't like that. Quebec doesn't like that. Nobody, a lot of people don't like that. And I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense, Paul. I don't think the Supreme Court's going to like it. So here are the alternatives, I guess, the basic alternatives. One is uh, every 5 years, you have to have a new government every 5 years. So that new government can decide whether to re-invoke the notwithstanding clause and keep the legislation in question, whatever it is. Uh, or you can kind of say, nope, the Supreme Court could say, well, no, you can only do that once. And then you have to bring it in new legislation. I just, I don't see the federal government's argument working, and I can see why the provinces are upset. All right. So, I predict that the Supreme Court is going to side with the provinces on this one and ignore the federal government's brief on it. So, that's just a little little Supreme Court insight into the constitutional arguments for people.
Whew, I'm still awake, Adam. Wait,
Good. All right. I thought
you almost got me there, but
when Quebec and Alberta are fighting, it's always worth checking in on it.
yeah, and I mean the notwithstanding clause I remember when it was first created. I thought, like, what a strange thing. You've got a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but you've got this other thing, typically Canadian. We've got the notwithstanding clause. You could avoid that in certain cases and cancel rights and freedoms for specific issues.
Yeah.
Years down the road now, it sort of looks like it was actually a wise thing to do because the rights and freedoms thing has gotten completely out of hand, as we talked about in the courts. The Stinchcomb case, for example.
Yeah.
That you have a right to find out every single thing in a legal case, whether applies to the case or not, which is essentially being used as an attack by lawyers on the integrity of the justice system to make it incapable of the police incapable of investigating crime. Maybe we should use the notwithstanding clause in that case too, saying, okay, we're going to cancel Stinchcomb because it's affecting the integrity of the country.
Well, I don't want, as a defense lawyer, I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but that could work. Or the government could bring in legislation just strengthening the protections of, investigations, having some mechanism. Listen, if there's an undercover operation involving international partners and all these things, there can be protections put in place that still allow people to know what the case. Anyways, there can be other ways to do it without handing over all of the secret documents to a defendant, or else deciding you don't want to and just letting the defendant go. There's definitely a middle ground there.
As I said, we need some law reform in the country.
Yeah, yeah, big project. I don't know if I don't know if this government's up for it, but somebody might be.
I'm sure you and I can conduct something over a week-long period or something and make some progress anyways.
That's right. It'll be
We'll skip a lunch or two.
future exactly. We gotta, it's important, so we gotta barrel through. All right, so Paul, I wanted to talk about. We got what 20 minutes or so here, I'd say. So yeah, you haven't pre-ordered Lisa Banfield's book, or should I say, Lisa Banfield, Maureen Banfield, and Sherri Aikenhead's book. It's three authors of this book. That was kind of the first thing that jumped out at me. She's somewhat, I guess, like an athlete that has a co-author on their biography, as told to kind of a thing.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about this is that all the people who were involved so far. Let's get beyond the sort of Lisa Banfield. Like Lisa Banfield, hopefully she's going to be telling the story and all the truths involved in the story that we've revealed in on this show and in my books, 22 Murders, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, showed what the evidence showed happened. Do I think that's going to happen? No,
Nope.
because so let's look at do you know who Sherri Aikenhead is?
So I did a little checking in on her. Looks like she lives in Bridgewater, has published previously a book on Carissa Boudreau, the murder by her mother, and that she was wrote at Maclean's magazine, at the Edmonton Journal, the Daily News, and worked for the DOJ, Department of Justice in Halifax for some time as well. But
Oh,
that's not far
I'm
away, Paul.
shocked. I'm
Yeah.
shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, well, this is according to her own bio on her own website and saying that that gave her insight into the Carissa Boudreau situation. And so then she started writing about it, which raised a few questions with me as to whether any of that information may have been confidentially received. But anyway, I'm sure she was careful about that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what she is a communications professional, which means a public relations.
Yeah.
That she's into public relations. I don't trust public relations people because they're not news people.
Well, this seems 100% a public relations exercise.
Yeah, and her DOJ connection, but there are other connections in this that are very important and should not be ignored. One of the people I was critical of in Anatomy of a Cover-Up in their coverage of Lisa Banfield. And for those who don't remember, Lisa Banfield was the so-called common law wife girlfriend of shooter Gabriel Wortman in Nova Scotia massacres. Lisa Banfield says she spent all night outside after getting away from Wortman. Was eventually rescued and at 6:30 in the morning by the RCMP, and then was protected as a victim from that point on, and never really faced any serious questions. So one of the people I was critical of in writing about this was, well, two people: Stephen Kimber, a Halifax former journalist at the Daily. What was the Daily News?
News, right?
Halifax Daily News.
Yeah.
He got a degree at GOV College in Maryland, and then he went on to become a professor at Dalhousie University, King's College, professor of journalism.
Yeah.
And the other one being Tim Bousquet, who he was aligned with at the Halifax Examiner. Their treatment of Banfield always really bothered me because they never ever seriously questioned her story and refused to question her story. So I look at Sherri Aikenhead now comes in to write this book with Lisa Banfield and Maureen Banfield. Well, Sherri Aikenhead is an acolyte by her own admission on her own website of Stephen Kimber.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something.
So she comes to this from the Stephen Kimber school of Lisa Banfield. So that's strike one against the book right there for me. The credibility issue is eh. So then you look at who's publishing the book. It's Sutherland Books. Who's Sutherland Books? Do you know anything about them?
No, I thought you would, and I was hoping you would.
Well, Sutherland Books is a small boutique publisher in Toronto run by Ken White.
Okay.
And Ken White has decided that yeah, and rightly so, that, he's a talented guy. And he decided that Canada needs more nonfiction publishers, and somebody has to do nonfiction in Canada because it's important. And I agree, it is important. But Ken White also, he publishes people like Andrew Coyne and other sort of Ottawa centric people writing about this, that, or the other thing about the government. but it's not really the hard-hitting stuff. It's more the meaty, thoughtful stuff. But Ken White's background is he was a golden boy of Conrad Black. And then he was chosen to be an editor at a very young age of Saturday Night Magazine before it sort of, the prestigious Saturday Night Magazine
Yeah.
after Conrad Black took over. And then he was, I believe, publisher of the National Post at the beginning. And now the National Post runs all the newspapers in Canada pretty well outside
Yeah.
of the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and a handful of others, including the Halifax Chronicle Herald, which it took over. So just follow this little intrigue here. So Ken White takes on this project, and where does it get publicized? Where did you read the story about it?
I read it in the National Post. It was a Chris
A
Lambie article,
National
who's a
Post.
Herald reporter, but it appeared first in the National Post.
Oh, well, it's not even a Herald reporter. Chris
Oh
Lambie
no.
wrote the story. He's from the Halifax Chronicle Herald, but after the National Post bought the Chronicle Herald and stripped the newsroom of basically all the reporters, there's a handful of reporters left there. Lambie was assigned to the National Post. He's a National Post reporter out of Nova Scotia.
All right.
And so
Farm
Lambie
reporter.
was, and Lambie, I've talked to Lambie in the past. I've tried to get him interested in doing stories based on anatomy of a cover-up. I thought there were pretty few legitimate stories in there, like who killed Corey Ellison,
Yeah.
And the Chronicle Herald is, months down the road now, does not want to touch the story. The National Post doesn't really want to touch the story, although, there was a podcast, National Post podcast that
Yeah.
dealt with it. So the National Post wrote the story, with Chris Lambie about this book coming out. Well, because it's their buddy, Ken White, who's publishing the story.
Yeah.
And remember the National Post, for all its chest thumping and about how wonderful it is. I mean, this is a paper that its founding publisher Conrad Black was spent time in jail in the States for fraud, purchased himself a pardon from Donald Trump, but he's allowed, in the old days, someone like him would not be allowed to be writing in your paper. They proudly let him write. And there are other people involved in the National Post who have sorted backgrounds who are allowed to write. So what is going on here is this promotion for Ken White and whatever to tell this side of the story. Lisa Banfield's side of the story, unchallenged.
I'm sure unchallenged. And by the way, Paul, in the promotional little paragraph, they've refused to do interviews. Sutherland Press will not turn down interview request from Chris Lambie, which was unusual. Well, anyway, I'm sure that was planned. But it was saying that she gets a chance to tell her story for the first time. I'm like, didn't she testify under oath about this? Actually, I don't remember if she was under oath. She testified or spoke about this at the Mass Casualty Commission, so it's not for the first time. I'm like you. I don't expect any breaking news to come from this book. I don't expect anything new at all, really. But of course, we'll have to read it. Um, I don't know. Some people have commented to me this is offensive to the families of the deceased.
Well,
Uh,
what
Maybe
it is,
we'll have to read it first, I guess, but it certainly has that potential.
well, getting back to the
Yeah,
National
yeah,
Post, you're right, because the National Post, I had a spat with National Post editor Rob Roberts, who comes from the Daily News, the Halifax Daily News, along with Sherri Aikenhead, who was
yeah.
at the Halifax Daily News, and Stephen Kimber, who was at the Halifax Daily News before it folded. And in the battle with Roberts a couple of weeks ago, he was upset that I used to quote an email from Deborah Stokes, one of his editors, when I was trying to write a story about Lisa Banfield back in the fall of 2020. And she turned down the story and said, "Oh, Rob, it's paraphrasing. Rob said, we can't do a story like that because women's groups will become, hounding us for being mean to Lisa Banfield. So I use that as an example of how difficult it was to tell a story about Lisa Banfield that was critical. And Roberts got upset and said, I used that without their permission, and they would never give permission, and that wasn't the real reason they canceled they wouldn't run the story because frankly they didn't want to hurt my feelings. They didn't trust my reporting, and therefore they're done with me for writing, putting this in the book. And I'm going, well, hello. Uh, First of all, if you didn't like my reporting, why did you run an excerpt from 22 Murders on the front page of the newspaper months later?
Yeah.
And secondly, um, I was being objective. Everything I've written about Lisa Banfield is based on the facts, the known facts, and the known evidence. And the National Post, and by extension, the Chronicle Herald, which has still not ever written a story about either of my books, that are number one books, twice number one books, and never a word of it in the Nova Scotia media. In over the last 3 years that those books have been out, the National Post and the Chronicle Herald refuse to be critical of Lisa Banfield or report the facts that I report in my stories about her. It's, so what is going on here, Adam? One last point is
Yeah.
what I see is you look at the Department of Justice sort of Sherri Aikenhead connection, the National Post connection, the Daily News connection, and this book serves to present the RCMP's version of events and create an alternative narrative to sort of fight what I've been writing about. So, I have my facts, and we have this emotional story that's likely going to come out that they're going to use as an example of the other side of the story, balance, such as it is. And it's all bull.
It'll like you can I feel like I've already read the book, Like you just, oh, it's going to be a call to action. Okay, great. Of course there will be, right? Because it all fits with the narrative. Like just okay, there should be more something. Anyway, I mean, I don't expect her to change her story. I'm sure it's been vetted and reread to make sure that there's nothing in conflict with anything that she said publicly at the Mass Casualty Commission. Well, I was going to say or anywhere else, but she hasn't said anything anywhere else. So anyway, it's so a few other details. It's coming out January 20th, 2026, although I see on Sherri Aikenhead's website you can pre-order it. It's called The First Survivor: Life with Canada's Deadliest Mass Shooter. And so what I think, Paul, if this book is to have any credibility, it needs to acknowledge and confront the questions that people have had about her account. Like, was there actually a video call to the States? Does that stupid story about the anniversary, is that really true? Is there any other detail on that? How did she get out of the police car? All of these things, like, where in the woods? Did you hear the drone coming over your head? Like all of it, like there's so many questions. If she doesn't confront those questions, then this book is going to have very little credibility.
Well, first of all, on her credibility, I got another note the other day from confirming something that I've always sort of known. This time, a former RCMP officer who was part of the investigation saying that when Lisa Banfield was found, she had no injuries, no handcuffs, she was barefoot, etc., and she was not hypothermic. Later on, she was, according to the Mass Casualty Commission. And, well, first of all, and then that confirms what a second officer wrote in their notes in the ambulance that was released by the Mass Casualty Commission. If she had any injuries, they were minor. There were no injuries.
Right.
Leon Jodry, who house she went to, said she had no injuries. Later on, we have the Mass Casualty Commission say, "Oh, she had a fractured spine and she had all these injuries, and she was in really rough shape, etc. And they made this story up. When she got on the stand at the Mass Casualty Commission, she was asked about her injuries by one lawyer. And she says, "Oh yeah, I have a bit of a sore back and my wrist. I have a scar on my wrist from where I got the handcuffs off." But that scar was never reported. That was never detailed in any of her injuries. And why would she take the handcuff off of one wrist that she admitted was on? It's just none of that makes sense.
We never saw the scar either. Uh,
Yeah.
anyway, no. Could have held her wrist up. Here it is. But anyway, not that you want to. So
But there's another twist here.
what's that?
What I think this is what's going to happen, that, or I fear this is what's going to happen. One of the things I've been doing over the last couple of months is negotiating with documentary companies, trying to get documentary companies interested in doing a documentary on what I think is a pretty legitimate story. The first book, the documentary was held up because the families refused to cooperate. So they couldn't tell a conventional story. And then in this book, I had a host of companies involved in pursuing the story. And one by one, they've all dropped off. Not all. There's still one or two around, but it sort of changed the way things are going to happen. But one of them dropped off, a company called Great West or Great Pacific um, Publications, which is a big company. And it was wild to do things, and then it suddenly dropped off and said, "Oh, they were no longer interested." And why weren't they interested? We have a TV series that's been going on for 13 years, Highway to Hell or something like that. One of those
Yeah.
tow truck stories. And we depend on the RCMP for access to these events. And therefore, we can't do anything critical of the RCMP.
Well,
And,
well.
and that disappeared. The people involved were shocked because it just suddenly came out of nowhere. And in my sort of experience, this is the way the RCMP works and the government works to basically stymie stories that are critical of the establishment and of the institutions. And I saw other companies drop off the same way. Yes, there are problems in the film industry right now, but this is a great story. It's a unique story. So I see the RCMP behind the scenes, the government behind the scenes, putting pressure on people, I suspect. What does Lisa Banfield's the Sherri Aikenhead book do? It provides a conventional story, alternative story that fits the format of documentary companies. And what you're saying, domestic violence. Here it is. We can film this, and they could tell a story based on not on the facts, but on the version of events that Lisa Banfield tells or Sherri Aikenhead tells. So I see Sherri Aikenhead in this. I hope she's not just a public relations manager marketing the story, but I was hoping for something a little more in depth. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I see these forces lined up: the National Post, the Daily Mail cabal, all of these people who are not telling the original story, refuse to address the facts in 22 Murders and Anatomy of a Cover-Up, sort of creating an alternative narrative that they can rally behind. And I think that's bull.
Well, Paul, if these documentary companies do a good enough job, the ice trucker or the whatever shows, it'll be a new police force with whom they'll have to seek cooperation, and there'll be a clean slate. So that's the way they should look at it. I would hope. I wonder if Paul, I wonder if Sherri Aikenhead would come on the show.
I'd love to have her on. I'd
Because
love to
there's a
have
lot of
Lisa
questions.
Banfield. I'd like to have Lisa Banfield on. I mean, I hope Sherri Aikenhead, when she does the book, has Lisa explain, and this is from the mass casualty records, how she was able to, if she was so abused, how was she able to spend, and so controlled by Wortman, how was she able to spend almost $5,500 a month uh, and pay for it on her visas alone for the previous 19 months, like $160,000, when she was making $15,000 a year. How does she pay for her Mercedes making $15,000 a year? As you said, where if she's going to talk about the relationship, is she going to talk about um, their emails where they talk about being each other's primary,
Yeah.
which is the language of polyamorous relationships. We have multiple sex partners.
Paul,
Explain this to me and explain why she spent most of her time not with Wortman and how she was abused living in Dartmouth while he was living in Portapic, and she didn't spend a lot of the vacation time with him. I want that all explained.
I suspect, Paul, for that reason, that those are tough questions. That one of the reasons I think to have a co-author, two co-authors here, be interested to hear what Maureen Banfield's contribution of to all this might have been. That, when it comes time for the book release in January, after Christmas, strangely, you think this, anyway, not that it's a Christmas book, gift book kind of a book, but strange time to release a book. But that at that time, I suspect you'll be seeing interviews with Sherri Aikenhead and not interviews with Lisa Banfield because it gives her that extra layer of protection. Like, here's a tough question about Lisa Banfield's story. Oh, didn't ask her about that. Her story's in the book and it's an important story.
Two
Okay,
things.
that's the answer you're going to get to all these interview questions, right? So it's
Yeah.
just it's going to be very unsatisfying, I predict.
Well, two things. One, I saw this playbook before in the Maher Arar case, which I write about in Anatomy of a Cover-Up. How Maher Arar was seen to be this victim of the RCMP and got sent to a Syrian prison and did all of this stuff. Came back on an apology and a $10 million settlement. The only person Arar talked to was Globe and Mail reporter Jeff Sallet, and no one else got to ask him questions. In fact, there was a sympathetic profile written of him by Jane Mayer in the New Yorker magazine, I believe. And I called Jane Mayer up and I said, "Did you talk to her?" I said, "No, I didn't." But she made it look like she did. And
Well,
it's that
well.
same sort of format where they're hiding behind a reporter who's telling a favorable story and not challenging their story when there's lots to challenge. Second thing, Maureen Banfield. Well, they're making it look like Wortman was a known commodity and a vicious guy who abused Lisa Banfield. Her own other sister, who I quote in the book, told the police on day one, we didn't know she was being abused. We didn't see that. We didn't like Gabe, but we had no idea he was abusing him. And Maureen's the Banfield brothers were helping him get ammunition.
Yeah.
They weren't fighting him. And then Maureen Banfield herself, a year before the massacres, bought a property right beside Wortman's warehouse on Orchard Beach Drive. Paid what, $18,000 for an acre and a half, and then eventually sold it after the massacres. Well, she doesn't seem to have been sort of worried about Wortman. She's buying property right there. So I
Mhm.
want her to explain all of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, hey, you never know. I stand to be corrected, but I wonder if we'll get those chances. So we'll see what comes along in January or even before that if
But
there's some.
watch how whatever's in that book gets picked up by the Halifax Examiner or the National Post and published as if it's real.
Yeah.
You know, as I said to the National Post editor Rob Roberts, in my book, I prove the narrative is wrong. I prove they're lying about their narrative. And I said, maybe you're the one that should be correcting the record, not me. But the media will not correct the record because it shows how poor a job they did. They don't want their audience to know how poor a job, how poor it was.
Well, Paul, I haven't ordered my book yet, but I will. I'll get the pre-order. I guess it'll be available in January. Downtime, good time to read a good book in the winter. But anyway, it's something we'll have to slog through, I think. Hopefully it doesn't get lost in the mail. Or hopefully somebody other than Canada Post is going to deliver it. You'll have to get
Well,
an
hopefully, as I
e-version.
said, yeah, like I'd hope that, Lisa Banfield takes this time to say, here's the real story and here's what really happened. don't give me this unverifiable slop that has been passed off that doesn't stand up to any sort of examination. But it's emotional. People will just read that, the people who get their news from Netflix and who don't aren't tuned in, but who are, campaigning against domestic violence will probably just lap it all up. And, you know, I wish
Well,
people were a little more objective.
well, we'll be here with a book report soon thereafter, and we'll be here next week as well with more stories. Always lots to discuss. Provincially, nationally, internationally. There's always something interesting to discuss here, and anything else to say, Paul, before we wrap it up?
No, I think we've said quite enough.
Yeah, that's
I'm not traveling anymore for a while, so
yeah, me neither. It's the fall, you got to buckle down and get to work here. So it's a good time to get some things done. So thank you everybody for watching tonight, and thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week.
thank you. Good night.